Hey guys, Bart from TST Industries here. In this video, we're going to show you the installation of these Womet-Tech adjustable racing levers on a Honda Grom. So you can see here in the studio, we have the 2017 Grom and also the first generation Grom. They actually use the same clutch perch and master cylinder configuration on both generations. So we will show you the installation of the levers on the new Grom and show you also what they look like on the first generation. It's a fairly simple installation. It'll take about 15 minutes. Let's begin. We're going to begin the process with the installation of the right side, the brake side lever, just because it's a little bit simpler. I'm going to use a 10mm box wrench. You can also use an open-ended or a socket. First, I will spin off the nut from the bottom of the pivot bolt going through the lever, and then I will remove that pivot bolt. Now, this is a brand new bike. Everything comes off really easy because it hasn't been exposed to any elements just yet. If you're doing this to a slightly older machine, it'll probably pose a little bit more of a challenge, but this is nice for our presentation. As you can see, the disassembly is really simple. I'm going to grab the brake side lever. On this particular bike, everything is still greased, but it will most likely not be on your bike, so I recommend using a little bit of bearing grease on all the interfacing surfaces. I will grab the pivot bolt and apply some grease to it around its around the smooth surface, and then I'm going to push this through the pivot hole on the lever, spin it around, and that will distribute my grease really nicely in there. In addition, I like to grease this surface because it interfaces with the master cylinder, and also the bottom surface that also interfaces with the master cylinder here. And now I will align the pivot hole of the new lever with the pivot hole of the master cylinder, making sure that this feature makes contact with our master cylinder piston, and then also this portion makes contact with your brake reed switch. And you can see here. Once I have that done, I will put in the pivot bolt and start threading it in by hand. Once I get some thread engagement, I will grab my 10mm wrench and get this pivot bolt bottomed out. Once you bottom it out, I'll just take another 30 degrees until it's locked in place. Once I get this tightened down, I make sure that we still have enough freedom of motion, no friction that would inhibit the use of our brakes. It's very important. It's a safety issue. I recommend going through that step. I'll take the nut that came off the pivot bolt on the bottom and thread that on. I have pretty good access here. I can bottom it out by hand. And then I can use a 10mm wrench, tighten it. If you're using a torque wrench, you could torque this to 177 inch-pounds and I'll lock it in place. Once again, test any motion inhibiting friction, and at the end of these steps I like to wipe off any excess grease so that we don't catch a bunch of dirt and sand in it. Alright, so that's done. I will grab an 8mm wrench, get on top of the bike, and adjust my lever position inboard versus outboard, and up, down, just because I like to fine tune these installations to my feel, and I recommend you do the same. I'm going to loosen the master cylinder from the back using an 8mm wrench. There's 2 screws that hold the clamp on. What I like to do is just keep them snug, loose enough to move around, but not loose enough so that everything moves by itself. Now, see, for myself, I have really big hands. So where I position my hand on the accelerator, I need to have this master cylinder inboard more, because I typically use one finger on these brakes, and I like them in this position. So once I find a good position for myself, I will lock this down, and this will vary from person to person. So I recommend playing around and finding the best comfort and safety for what you're doing. And now, once this is locked down, we can adjust the distance from the bar using our 6-position adjuster. For me, this is too short. I like to have it out further and get it to the max. That's a little bit too much. For myself, I like it on 5, and you guys will have to experiment with your settings to best cater to your needs. All right, so we're done with the brake side. We're going to move over to the clutch side. On this side, we will begin by removing the rubber protective boots from their position to expose this component here, the cable adjuster, and also I will remove this or pull it back. This is not necessary for the installation, but I wanted to pull it back so you guys have access to seeing the nut that we will be removing. So next step will be to remove this 10mm nut. Again, I'm using a box wrench. You could use open-ended or socket. I'm gonna remove this nut, and then the pivot bolt will need to come out. This particular pivot bolt uses a flathead screwdriver. I will take that out and put it to the side. Now our lever is free to come out of the perch, but the cable is not free to come out of the adjuster just yet. We will need to loosen this adjuster and align the slots with the slot in the perch and the lever, and then the cable will be free to come out. To do that, I will use a simple plier. Once I crack it loose, this will be free to come out by hand, and I will just align my slots together like you see here, and I will be able to pull the lever out and pull the clutch cable out through those slots. I will turn this lever upside down, turn it 90 like this to align the cable with the slot here, and that will permit me to remove the OEM lever. So now let's grab our new sexy Womet-Tech lever for the clutch side and go through the same procedure before mounting as we did on the brake side. I'm going to dab a little bit of grease on the pivot bolt. That will ensure nice smooth operation and won't wear my bearing surfaces prematurely. I'm going to get that in there and spin it around, make sure to distribute this grease in the pivot hole, and also get these surfaces like I did on the brake side. They interface with the perch. Having them greased up will ensure smooth operation, and it will also keep water out, keep it from deteriorating your system here. So now, first step in the reassembly here will need to be to get the clutch cable back in. Basically, just do the reverse steps of disassembly. Now, I'm going to turn this lever this way to put it in position to go back into the perch. But first, I will need to get the cable through. Once the cable goes in the adjuster, pivot this whole thing in this way and make sure to align the pivot hole with the pivot hole on the lever. And we'll get the pivot bolt, get it mated in those two holes and start threading it in by hand. Greasy fingers, so it's making this difficult. I'm going to use the rag to get it in. I typically like to start threads by hand. That enables me to prevent any sort of cross threading that may happen if I were just to start off with a tool. And once I get it started, I'll get the flathead screwdriver and get it turned in and get it bottomed out. Once the pivot bolt bottoms out, I'm not really going to tighten it because we're going to have to go through a procedure to make sure that this is the perch is not so tight that it inhibits motion of your lever. All right, so this is fully tight. As you can see, it jams up the lever, but if we back out on this a little bit, it'll permit the lever to move freely. So we need to find a spot here where this works really well, and then get our 10mm nut on from the bottom, and that will serve as a lock nut for this pivot bolt in that position. So I think we're good here. I'm gonna try a little bit tighter. We're still good. Go a little bit tighter until I find where it starts binding. And then I'm gonna come back from that position. I'm gonna hold it in place. I'm gonna hold the pivot bolt in place with the screwdriver while I turn in my lock nut. Okay, now I overdid it just a little bit here. So I'm gonna back it out and adjust it again. And this is essential here, this adjustment procedure. This will prevent your ride from being unsafe. Just takes a couple of tries sometimes with certain perches. All right, almost. Probably one more try and we'll get it. All right, that looks good to me. If you're using a torque wrench to tighten the nut from the bottom while ensuring that you still have enough play, I would suggest using 177 inch-pounds. At this point, you can put this boot back on. All right, now last part here will be to adjust your clutch cable for proper tightness. I can't really finalize this until I have the bike on the floor because I will need to turn the bars. Turning the bars to one side versus the other to the limit will cause different tightness in the cable, and we need to make sure that the cable is slack enough so that you don't engage the clutch even a little bit at those limits. So we will finalize that later. Right now what we'll do is just make sure that the slots don't line up so that the cable doesn't jump out on us. I will wipe off any remaining grease that may have sneaked onto my outer surfaces here. We don't want to collect debris or dirt. Jump up on the bike and go through an adjustment procedure. As you can see, again, my hands or my finger falls here. I typically use 2 fingers on the clutch. My fingers are not linear to the front to line up with this divot and go to the side a little bit. That's uncomfortable. So I'm gonna move this whole perch inboard just a little bit. And at the same time, I'm gonna match the angle I have on my brake. Talking about angle around the axis of the bars here. So first adjustment will be inboard. Once I find a comfortable spot here, that looks good to me. Now I'll find that comfortable angle on the axis of the bars, and I think right there really does it for me. Tighten back down on the 8mm hex heads on the clamp here. All right, and this feels good now. I'm just gonna adjust the distance from the bars. Again, 6 is just a little bit too long for me. 4 is okay, but 5 really does it. Now, I don't necessarily have to adjust these to be symmetrical from the left to the right. I basically do it by feel, and I suggest you guys do the same. So this is pretty much done. We're just gonna have to take the motorcycle off the lift and finalize the tightness of the clutch cable, and then we'll be done. So let's proceed to that. In this last step here, like I mentioned, we will be tightening the clutch cable. So turn the bars to the limit on one side and feel how much slack there is, and also test the other side, and then make small adjustments. What you're looking for is just a little bit of slack. And what you want to do away with is the potential of the tightness in the cable just from being at one limit, actually pulling on the clutch. So I like this position here, so I'm going to lock down on this locking component. I'm going to use my pliers, and while I do that, I'm going to make sure that the main adjuster portion here does not turn. All right, and once this is locked up completely, we are done. I'm going to replace this boot. Just want to mention to you guys that this boot does not play nicely with the adjuster here. It's sort of cumbersome, but once you get it adjusted, you should be good to go. You probably don't need to have access to this adjuster on the fly, so this boot will not really inhibit anything that you're doing. On other bikes, this boot is just not used, and all of this is exposed. I don't know why Honda decided to use this boot, but it's there. I'm gonna keep it in place, and that's pretty much it. Now, I wanna urge you guys to seek a professional to do this if you have any hangups. Your controls are your lifeline, your brakes, your clutch, those have to operate properly. So if you catch any snags during this installation, please seek professional help, or at least advice, and let somebody help you, somebody that has done this many times. All right. Last but not least, I want to mention that the engineers that design these parts work really hard, and if you believe in the product, I suggest that you support it. What I like to do is place a sticker on my bike if I'm satisfied with the parts. I hope you guys do the same. All right, I'm done. This bike is ready to go. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Typically I go through a closing spiel, but I'm going for a ride. See you next time.